TempDev's flu vaccine clinic templates offers 2 practice templates, an end-user administration template as well as a configuration template. In this demo, we're going to review our configuration template, how to process and update the config, and how that affects our administration template. Our configuration template is broken out into 3 different panels. Our first panel is this vaccine configuration. In our vaccine configuration, there's a vaccine manufacturer field where when I click on this, it'll bring up my vaccine inventory. From this pick list, I can select a vaccine, and my CVX and CPT codes fill in appropriately based off of our inventory that's set up. I also have an option to add admin codes. Selecting this field will bring up this admin codes pick list to choose from. And then I also can apply Medicare admin codes as well. You also have options to default this as adults or peds. So I'm going to go ahead and select that as a pediatric vaccine and click on my add. That'll then add this to the grid, and this will be all the appropriate options that your end users will see on the administration template. Based on the age group of the patient that they're seeing, that option would be available to them. Our next panel is our template default setup. You have an option to hide the configuration button from the administration template, so your end users would not even see the option to launch this template from there. Then we have the following settings. You can default the patient search, default it by a patient's name, or you have an option to default by patients with appointments only. When I select this option, I do get an option to check and only show kept appointments. Again, these are just defaults. End users can still search by patients' names if the patient doesn't have an appointment or it's not showing appropriately. You can also default vaccine non-VFC and VFC, the default reason code, and the default funding source. You can enable VFC billing. You can also default to always create a new encounter. So when the end user is administering the vaccine, saves the option, it will create a new encounter for that patient. You can also default the location validation. So what this does is the system will validate that the current location matches the encounter location that's linked to the appointment. And if there is a mismatch, the end user will receive an alert. You can also default the administration site. So for us, we have ours defaulted to left arm. You can also deselect that to where the end user does always have to choose their administration site. You can default the state immunization registry if applicable. You can also default an encounter document. So on our example, we have immunization record defaulted, and that will generate under the encounter that is created on the patient's chart. You can also default the encounter patient type. You can default the workflow status. So once an end user administers the vaccine, saves that, it will default the encounter status to our option that we have here to checked out for our patients. And then you can also default the administered by group, and for us we have administrators here. In our next panel, we have the default provider mapping. Here's where you can configure a provider by location as well as age group. So in our location field, I can select here, choose a location from my pick list. In my rendering provider, I can select a provider. And if they do require a supervising provider, this option would be available, but for this provider, it's not required. And then I can also default this provider for adults or pediatric patients, and then click my add button. So now when I have that location selected in my rendering provider, that rendering provider would be the default selected there. Here in this grid, you'll see the running list of those configured provider mappings. To make adjustments, highlight from the grid. You have an option to update and or remove if needed. So that's the configuration template and how that affects the changes on this template affects our administration and user side.